Catherine couldn't remember the last time she felt truly at ease around her mother-in-law, Barbara. It had always been that way. From the moment Catherine married John, Barbara had made it clear she wasn't just a mother-in-law, but a constant presence in the couple's life. Barbara's eyes always seemed to be watching, as though she was judging everything Catherine did, from the way she decorated her house to how she raised her daughter, Maya. Hi there, I'm Goldie, and welcome to Goldie's Love Stories. It wasn't just that Barbara was always there. It was that she made her opinions known, whether they were welcome or not. Catherine had learned to ignore most of it, but it was hard. It was hard when every family dinner turned into a debate about parenting styles. Or when Barbara would show up uninvited, just to help, but her presence only made things more stressful. Catherine felt like she was constantly walking on eggshells, trying to balance her own wants and needs with Barbara's never-ending interference. John never seemed to notice the tension. Or if he did, he didn't care. He was used to his mother being involved in everything, so to him it was normal. But for Catherine, it was anything but normal. It felt like she was always second place, always competing for attention, affection, and approval. One evening, Catherine sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone, when she heard the front door open. Maya, her 9-year-old daughter, rushed inside, her small face lighting up with excitement. But Catherine didn't immediately feel the joy that a mother should when their child returned home. Not this time. Maya had just spent the weekend at Barbara's house, and Catherine had already been dreading it. The last time Maya had come back from Barbara's, she had been full of strange ideas. "Grandma says we should always be quiet so we don't upset Grandpa's nap," Maya had said, her voice too serious for a child so young. Catherine had rolled her eyes at the memory. There was always something off about the way Barbara influenced Maya, making her act older than her age, giving her opinions and ideas that didn't fit into their little family world. "Maya, what do you have there?" Catherine asked, trying to sound casual as her daughter walked into the kitchen holding a small, mysterious box. "Oh, Grandma gave it to me," Maya said, eyes wide with excitement. "She said I should keep it safe." Safe from what? Catherine couldn't hide the suspicion in her voice, but Maya didn't seem to notice. She just handed the box over and ran off to her room. Catherine stared at the box for a moment. It wasn't big, maybe the size of a shoebox, but something about it felt wrong. She tried to shake off the feeling, but it lingered in the back of her mind. Why would Barbara give Maya something in a box? Something she thought needed to be kept safe? Catherine's heart skipped a beat. She opened the box slowly, her fingers trembling slightly. Inside, wrapped in old, worn cloth, was a knife. A large kitchen knife, the kind Barbara had always used for chopping vegetables. But what caught Catherine's attention wasn't just the knife. It was the bloodstains. The dark red blotches that covered the blade. Catherine's stomach twisted into knots. She felt her breath catch in her throat as she stared at the knife. "What the hell?" Catherine muttered under her breath. She could hardly believe what she was seeing. What was going on? Why was there blood on the knife? Had Barbara been hurt? Had something happened while Maya was with her? Her mind raced, jumping from one thought to the next. Could Barbara have been in danger? Or had something even darker been going on? Without thinking, Catherine grabbed her phone and dialed the police. Catherine's hands were shaking as she spoke to the dispatcher. Her voice was tight, barely steady. "Yes, there's a knife with blood on it. My daughter brought it home from her grandmother's house. I think something might be wrong." She repeated herself, trying to sound calm, but she could feel the panic rising inside her. The dispatcher was polite, asking for her address, details about the knife, and if she knew if anyone had been hurt. Catherine barely noticed the words. Her mind was racing. Why had Barbara given Maya a knife? What was going on? Had her mother-in-law hurt someone? Had she hurt herself? And why hadn't Maya said anything about it? By the time the police arrived, Catherine had already started pacing in the living room. She felt like she was suffocating under the weight of her own thoughts. What if Barbara had been involved in something dangerous? What if this was just the beginning of something much worse? She had no answers, only questions. And the more she thought, the more tangled everything seemed. The officers took the knife and examined it carefully, their faces unreadable. One of them asked Catherine to explain how she had found the knife and why she thought something was wrong. She told them about the box, about Maya bringing it home, and about Barbara's strange behavior over the years. She wasn't sure if the officers were taking her seriously, but their expressions softened when she mentioned her concerns about Barbara's health. "We'll need to speak with your mother-in-law," one of the officers said, looking at the knife again. "We'll also need to ask her about the blood on it." Catherine nodded, though her stomach twisted into knots. She was relieved the police were taking action, but at the same time, a wave of guilt washed over her. Had she overreacted? Was she wrong to call the police? What if this was all a misunderstanding? The officers left the house with the knife, and Catherine felt a strange emptiness in her chest. Maya was still in her room, playing, unaware of what had just happened. Catherine couldn't bring herself to tell her daughter the truth. Not yet. It was too much, too soon. She'd have to wait until the police sorted everything out. Hours passed, but Catherine couldn't sit still. She went over the events in her mind again and again, trying to piece everything together. When the phone finally rang, she nearly jumped out of her skin. It was one of the officers. "We've been to Barbara's house. We spoke with her, and she's physically fine. It seems the blood on the knife was from a small cut she got while preparing dinner. However, we noticed something a little concerning during our conversation." Catherine's stomach clenched. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. The way she responded, her memory, her confusion, wasn't quite right. "We've seen similar signs before, but we're not medical professionals. We strongly recommend you have her evaluated by a specialist." Catherine's breath caught in her throat. Is she okay? What's wrong with her?" "We can't say for sure," the officer replied gently. "But we think she may be showing some signs of something more serious. It's best to get her checked by someone who knows what to look for." Catherine sat down slowly, her mind racing. The word serious echoed in her head. What could this mean? Was it more than just old age? Was Barbara really slipping that far? "Thank you," Catherine managed to say, her voice quieter now. She hung up the phone, the weight of the conversation sinking in. Barbara had always been so strong, so in control. The idea that something was seriously wrong felt impossible to grasp. She sat in the silence for a while, still stunned. John would be home soon, but Catherine wasn't sure how to explain this new development to him. How could she tell him that his mother was possibly losing her mind? Would he be angry at her for calling the police? Or would he see that there was no other choice? Her mind spun in circles, and before she knew it, she was pacing again. What would happen to Barbara now? Was it too late to fix things? Would Barbara even understand what was going on? The next day, Catherine arranged for Barbara to be evaluated. It was a long, exhausting process. Catherine sat beside Barbara in the waiting room, her heart heavy with guilt. She had always believed that Barbara was just difficult, controlling, harsh, maybe even manipulative at times. She never considered that something more serious could be going on. And now, seeing Barbara so fragile, so vulnerable, Catherine couldn't help but wonder if she'd misjudged her all these years. When the results came in, it was clear. Barbara had early signs of dementia. The doctors explained that it wasn't unusual for people in her age group to begin showing memory loss and confusion, but Barbara's symptoms were more severe than expected. They would need to monitor her closely and begin a treatment plan to slow the progression of the disease. Catherine stood there, listening to the doctor's words, her heart sinking with every sentence. She had no idea what to do now. How could she, of all people, be the one to care for Barbara? The woman who had made her life miserable for so long? But as she looked at her mother-in-law, sitting quietly beside her, she felt a deep wave of sadness. Barbara wasn't the woman who had tormented her with harsh words and judgments. She was a woman who was losing herself, and Catherine couldn't bring herself to turn away. John, too, was struggling. He'd always been close to his mother, but seeing her in this state was overwhelming. "What do we do now?" he'd asked when they first heard the news. His voice had been shaky, as if he wasn't sure how to navigate this new world of care and uncertainty. "I don't know," Catherine had replied. "I never thought it would come to this." They both knew Barbara couldn't stay at home on her own anymore. But where would she go? Catherine wasn't sure she was ready to make that decision yet, but deep down, she knew that it had to be made. Things couldn't go on like this. After the police visit, Catherine and John spent several days researching dementia and possible care options. It wasn't easy. There were so many choices, so many things to consider. The care facilities they visited were sterile and clinical, and Catherine found herself rejecting them outright. Barbara would never be happy in one of those places. They spoke to doctors, caregivers, and specialists, each of them explaining what they were up against. The reality of dementia settled in like a dark cloud over their home. It wasn't just memory loss. It was confusion, erratic behavior, and a slow decline into a world that Barbara didn't fully understand. "I think it's time we look into moving her," Catherine said one evening, her voice filled with uncertainty. She had been hesitant to make this decision, but as the days wore on, it became clearer. Barbara needed specialized care, and she couldn't provide it at home. John nodded. "I know. It's hard. She's my mother." "I know," Catherine replied softly. "It's hard for me too, but we have to do what's best for her." The next few weeks were filled with appointments and paperwork. Catherine and John made the difficult decision to move Barbara to a care facility that specialized in dementia. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best they could do. At least Barbara would be safe, and they wouldn't have to worry about the danger she might pose to herself. When the conversation about moving to a care facility came up, Barbara's reaction was explosive. She'd never been good at accepting change, and now, in her confused state, she couldn't fathom why she needed to leave her home. "I'm not going anywhere," Barbara yelled, her eyes wild with fear and anger. "You can't make me." "I'm fine." Catherine and John exchanged a look, the weight of the situation settling in their bones. It was like trying to reason with a child, only this child was once a fierce, proud woman who had been a central part of their lives. "Mom," John said gently, "we need to make sure you're safe. You can't stay here on your own anymore." Barbara shook her head furiously. "I don't need anyone. I can take care of myself. Leave me alone." A few days later, Catherine received a call from John. He sounded frantic, his voice trembling with concern. "Catherine, Barbara's gone. She left the house, and we can't find her. She hasn't been answering her phone." The words hit Catherine like a punch to the gut. Her heart raced as she tried to make sense of it. Barbara? Gone? She had never done something like this before. The fear crept into Catherine's chest as she imagined her mother-in-law wandering somewhere, lost and disoriented. Catherine's mind raced as she tried to recall the last time she saw Barbara. She hadn't left her house in days. What could have made her leave now? Catherine joined John and the search party immediately. Neighbors were alerted, and they combed through nearby streets, knocking on doors, asking anyone if they had seen Barbara. The hours stretched on, each minute more unbearable than the last. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack, and the panic of not knowing where Barbara was, whether she was safe or in danger, gnawed at Catherine's every thought. Just as they were about to contact the police again, they received a tip from an elderly neighbor down the street. She had seen Barbara near the park, walking slowly, her eyes distant. When they arrived at the park, Catherine's heart sank. There, sitting on a bench in the fading light of the afternoon, was Barbara. She looked smaller somehow, hunched over, her hands shaking as she clutched a torn scarf around her neck. Her eyes darted around in confusion, as if she didn't recognize the people standing in front of her. "Barbara," Catherine said softly, her voice cracking. "Where have you been? We were so worried." Barbara didn't respond at first, her gaze vacant and distant. Then, her eyes flickered up to meet Catherine's, but there was no recognition there, just fear. I don't know, Barbara mumbled, her voice shaking. I didn't mean to. I just had to leave. Leave? Catherine asked, stepping closer. Where were you going, Mom? Barbara's eyes welled up with tears, her hands trembling as she fumbled for words. I don't remember. I thought I was going home. It was clear now. Barbara had wandered off, confused and scared. The reality of her condition, the dementia, hit Catherine like a cold slap. This wasn't just a one-time incident. This was her new reality. Let's get you home, Catherine said gently, her voice calm but firm, trying to ease Barbara's panic. We'll get you some help, okay? But Barbara recoiled, her eyes widening with fear. No, I can't go back. I'm not going back there. Not after what happened. Catherine's heart broke. She understood. Barbara was afraid. Afraid of being controlled, of losing her independence. But Catherine knew, deep down, that it wasn't safe for Barbara to continue living alone in this state. Barbara, Catherine said, her voice full of empathy, you're not alone anymore. We'll make sure you get the care you need. It's not about taking away your freedom. It's about making sure you're safe. Barbara hesitated, her face contorting with inner turmoil. For a long moment, she sat in silence, staring at her hands. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she looked up at Catherine with tear-filled eyes. I don't want to be a burden. You're not a burden, Catherine reassured her, kneeling down to take her hands. We'll find a place where you'll be well taken care of. Please, just trust me. Barbara sniffled, wiping at her face with the back of her hand. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she nodded. Okay, I'll go. The weight that had been pressing down on Catherine's chest lifted slightly, but she knew the journey wasn't over. The road ahead would be difficult, but Barbara's decision to finally accept help was the first step toward a new chapter for both of them. The day came when Barbara was moved to the care facility. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't without its struggles, but Catherine knew it was the right thing to do. Barbara, though resistant at first, gradually adjusted. The facility staff were kind and patient, and Barbara's days began to take on a routine. Catherine visited regularly, and although there were moments of tension, there were also moments of connection. She learned to see Barbara not just as her overbearing mother-in-law, but as a person who had been dealt a cruel hand. The experience reshaped Catherine. She learned more about herself, her capacity for patience, and her ability to care for someone she had once resented. She had made peace with the past, and in the process, she had found a new kind of strength. And for Barbara, though her memory continued to fade, there were glimpses of the woman she had once been, proud, stubborn, but ultimately in need of love and understanding. Thanks for watching. How would you rate this story? Give it 1 to 5 hearts in the comments, and let me know what you thought. This is a brand new channel, and your support means the world to me. If you enjoyed the story, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you never miss an episode. Your likes, comments, and shares help this community grow, and I'd be so grateful to have you along for the journey. See you next time.